I had to take a photo because it's just almost you each could have a table.
Wait, you can do a photo of the. I'll be the audience. So just here's the.
All right. Chair's eye view. I have to get Barry out of the view, so we'll do this.
The day when there was more people behind the camera than in front of it.
All right.
Well, I'm gonna log in so that you have at least one head count. Oh yeah, I've been logged in. Lars says that there was only two. Well, don't believe Barry.
Okay, I think it's time and we should get going. All right. So welcome to the PROCON working group meeting. All right, I want to give the clicker control. I'm Leslie Daigle. I'm your co-chair.
And Yariako, the other co-chair.
So please do note well, even if you have participated and perhaps participated in writing the note well. These are the terms under which we have IETF meetings and you participate in them. If there are any elements here of which you're unsure, please do go ahead and read the material describing the expected behavior in detail. Okay. Some meeting tips, which you may already have been exploring if you were in dispatch this morning. We will be using Meet Echo for the queue, whether you're in the room or remote. So everybody, please make sure to log in if you haven't already. And some handy resources. All right, this is our agenda for today. We've done the note well, and thank you very much, Pete Resnick, for agreeing to take notes. I know he is soliciting for others to help him in the group edit document, so please do join him in there and help. Are there any bashes to this agenda? All right, got a thumbs up from Barry. No other reactions. This is the first session after lunch in this time zone, so it's going to be lively. All right. So first up, we will go to the to Rich for the 2026 bill. Rich, do you want to drive?
Why don't you? There's only 5 slides, so I'll just say next. Okay, next.
Hang on. Still going through all the clickies. All right.
Okay, so the update. Since we last met in person, there have been 4 drafts. This is, I guess, the second meeting in the PROCON group. So 02 published in December, 1st of December. This was clarified that decisions, not discussions, must be public, because that had come up in recent things, Anyhow, that's all. That's the only semantic content in that revision. Plenty of time for people to absorb that. Revision 3 in late January pointed to BCP 78 for the definition of what a contribution is, clarified the procedures for experimental and informational, clarified that ADs can delegate to another AD when handling an appeal, added AD sponsor as an example of a non-working group creation of or initiation of an RFC. There are other paths to have them created, right, and then progress through the internet standards process. Point out that clarify that the LLC maintains mailing lists and public records, Rather, it previously said that every working group must have a mailing list. Well, yes, the LLC handles those kinds of things. Minor renaming of the IETF trust to the IETF IPMC. And some other minor editorial wording changes. Things like, whereas in the previous publication, things that had to be emphasized were offset from the left margin and surrounded by rows of asterisks. We have more technologically advanced ways of doing that now. Typefaces and such. So some of those appearances also changed. Next slide. At the end of the month, end of January, Pete pointed out that we were pretty much able to remove the terminology section completely. There were only a couple places where we had to point either make some forward references, or the terminology says you should now know who the parties are as defined in RFC, and I don't remember what the number was, but the one that I wrote that updated a previous thing. Some editorial changes, consistency around the internet standards process, avoiding things like hyphenating internet standards related, erroneously change RFC editor to RFC publication center. It should be production center, fixed in the next draft. Updated the BCP definition and explained that that's how the IETF that's where the IETF, the subseries that the IETF publishes the documents to control how it works. Sometimes it was called a subseries, sometimes it was called a substream, so made that all consistent. A couple days later, updated the internet draft section thanks to Brian Carpenter, who pointed out there were some inconsistencies about where internet drafts were defined and maintained and used between 2026 and 2418. So that was all done. Yes, Gene, it's the later draft. Yari pointed that out also, and it's fixed in the editor's copy right now. Okay, so that's everything that's happened since in terms of draft publication. Next. Also, 124, we asked the IESG, Miria, brought up that there have been some BCPs that were published on the IAB stream. Brian was there or did some other research, and all of those went through the IETF consensus process. So while they are marked as being on the IAB stream, Brian and I asked the IESG to ask the RPC to change them all to be marked as being in the IETF stream, because some of them had to do with how the IETF does its work. Sent a copy of that email to the mailing list. We got an AC from our chair, from Roman, saying, yeah, we've got it. We'll get to it at some point, presumably. But that's sort of disentangling that historic thing. It was sort of the last thing about the confusion about where BCPs can be published, because other text says that if it's published on the IETF stream, of course, it must have IETF consensus. So all of those documents had consensus. And so we're asking that they all indicate that they are published on the IETF stream.
So Roman is in queue. Roman, do you want to speak to that point?
I do. Hi. Thanks actually for the group for identifying that issue. Yeah, we have not had a chance to get to that as we were preparing for this meeting, but we have it scheduled for the next telechat to walk through those documents and get the ISG opinion on that. So we'll have word back to you soon, pretty soon after this meeting.
Great. Okay. Is it knit on the slide that I'm just reading the commentary from Robert there, the question. Is it on the slide? Yeah, what should really happen, the problem is that the stream implies right where the thing was published or who wrote it. In most of the cases, it doesn't matter. In cases where it does, the IAB documents should explicitly say this is an IAB thing. It's kind of weird that the IAB chair authored one or more IETF BCPs, but so it goes.
So I see a number of people in queue, and I'm wondering, do we want to dive in more into this now, or are we going to wait and see what the ISG thinks? And I'm sort of looking at you, Rich, for thoughts on that.
We already made the request and put it on the list. If people have comments, sure, happy to hear it now.
Okay, Eric?
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure all those documents did have IETF consensus. They may have had IETF last calls. That's not the same thing. And certainly when I was in the IAB, we did not feel like we were bound by the IETF consensus process by publication. So, so I'm not clear to me. I'm not sure actually that works.
Okay. Brian.
Yeah, I was going to comment on the same point. Basically, I believe that all the ones in question, I went back far enough in the records and they all have tracker entries, which is a bit of a miracle for the older ones. They all do seem to have had, some sort of last call. It might have been less formal than today because we didn't have the tooling. And so I think investigation would show that they all did go through some version of the consensus process, though not necessarily consensus process we have today. And the other comment is that back in the day, the IAB was not consistent in how it handled authorship in their documents. So some of them have a list of members, some of them don't. It was all a little bit loose. So I'm fairly sure that all the ones we mentioned in our message to the ISG really did go through a BCP consensus process. And we're not talking about informational stuff or opinions of the IAB. We're talking about consensus documents. So anyway, I'll leave the ISG to look at it, but that's my opinion.
Barry?
This is Barry Lieba. I'll go a little farther than what Ecker said. I'm quite convinced that they do not have IETF consensus. For the most part, they were put out for comments, not for IETF last call, and there is a difference. They were not approved by the IESG, so the process was entirely different. I'm okay with picking specific ones where there's a reason to move them to the IETF stream and addressing it that way, but just taking all IAB authored RFCs and moving them to the IETF stream does not seem the right thing to do.
Sure. I'm sorry if I misspoke there. It wasn't intended to move all of the IAB RFCs. It was specifically the ones that are labeled BCPs that had to do with IETF operations and procedures.
Ones that were published as BCPs probably did have IETF consensus, so I would be okay with that. But
Yeah.
just we need to be careful about which ones we move and which ones we don't.
Yeah, no, there was an explicit list in the mail that went to
Okay,
this working group into the ISG.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that mostly covers what I raised my hand for as an individual participant, not as chair, is that no, you certainly can't take all the IAB documents and make them IETF stream because the IAB ain't the IETF.
Yep.
And I had recalled it as being about if you're going to publish something in the standards process, which is what the BCPs and standards are, then it's a different question. So yes, we have to be pretty crisp in our terminology there. And
Yeah.
So speaking to the slide is not really that helpful. It's more about speaking to the issue. So I locked the queue. Paul, go ahead.
Paul Hoffman. So I have a concern, and I'm sorry, I don't remember if it was Ecker who brought it up, which is saying something's is an IETF stream document, or that it's a BCP that was not actually, after the public comment, was considered in the IESG and had a vote and such. And I don't think some of those did because they were IAB documents. My question here is, are we going to have sort of two types of IAB BCPs?
Yeah, so having lived some of that dream,
Right, exactly right. And I didn't. I
yeah,
just want to be very clear. Yeah.
I think that as Brian articulated earlier, it requires a little bit more digging and
Right.
clarity and fact finding. So I think again, we shouldn't be speaking to what's on the slide, but recognizing that the issue is making sure that if there were things that were
Yeah.
BCPs and put them in the IETF stream if they demonstrably had the kind of process review they needed.
And I just want to make sure that that includes an IESG evaluation of the public comments. And if not, we can have two types, but I would like to make that clear. Thanks.
Yeah.
Sure.
So just
Yeah.
making a chair comment that this issue initially came from the discussion in this working group, but we've sort of handed it over to the ISG, and the ISG will for sure make a careful determination, take all the comments that were spoken today into account, and they'll do the right thing. But it's not our job in this working group to figure out the details of that.
Yeah, Joel said, yeah, I didn't carefully edit the slide before I submitted it. It's not the art to reclassify all IAB authorized IETF BCPs, not all of their RFCs. Like, it should not be on the IETF stream for the report on monitoring networks and
Point
and
is
so on.
just the ones that came out of the IAB but were really IETF documents in the first place.
Yes.
That's what we're talking.
Yep. And there's a specific list, and I'll repost the message to the list. Roman pasted it into the chat. Okay. So that's what has happened up until now. Some pending changes. The editor's copy, Pete found a bunch of editorial nits a couple of times. Yari found one about RPC and the P being wrong. We have two public pull requests waiting. One points out, remove some words because STD and BCP subseries need not have a new RFC published. Also, by that wording change, it also makes it clear that for example, BCP 9, I guess that includes 2026, would then be changed to include instead what this new RFC would be. So that's all. Sometimes they'll get a new number, sometimes they won't get sometimes new RFC will be published, sometimes the new RFC will not be published. We have examples of both. Another pull request 71, this section that talked about how the ISG looks at when given a draft to be published, reviews it, decides what track it should be on if it disagrees with what the original proposal is. It goes to IETF last call. After the last call is done, the IESG may decide, okay, based on the feedback we heard, it shouldn't be, pardon me, proposed standard, it should be experimental. I sort of shuffled around a few sentences about that to make it look more chronologic order. Pete suggested the wording is now worse. I don't know if anybody cares other than Pete and I. If anyone has strong feelings, post to the list or say it here. Otherwise, I'll probably just revert it back to the way it was for
Pete, you're in queue.
efficiency.
Pete, you're in queue. Did you want to speak to that point? Okay.
So yeah, the plan on 71 is just to go back to the original text, the previous text. Next steps, new draft to come out, which will have just a couple of other changes that were mentioned on the previous slide. And then I think it's ready for last call, working group last call, and push it out along the process.
Great. Anyone want to make any other comments? Any final thoughts from you, Rich? Sounds like a plan.
Sounds like a plan. The room from here looks like a waiting room for a Chinese restaurant. I hope nobody takes offense at that. But
well, I
Okay.
mean, it's positively bursting with people at this point. So, I mean, we've made great
Well,
progress. Great. Thank you, Rich.
Okay.
Right. So are you ready, Dave?
Yes, let me see how this works. We haven't tried doing a presentation from Tokyo yet, so can you hear me all right?
I think I'm gonna have to do the. Hang on. Who's driving?
I'm not.
It should be me, but oh, there we go. Sorry. I will. Okay. Are you ready for the next slide?
Well, can you hear me all right?
Yeah. It's
All right,
it's better
cool.
when you're a little bit closer to the mic, but that sounds okay. Yeah.
All right, sounds, here, let me actually put you like this so I stop like. Ridiculous. Okay, there we go. All right, hi everyone. I'm David Skenazy, one of the editors on 2418. Next slide, please. A quick update in the odd chance we have someone in the room who actually hasn't been at the previous meeting. It doesn't appear to be that way on either of the camera feeds, but we've been starting this kind of for the past few years. But more recently, now that we've kind of adopted the documents, I'm gonna start doing today focus on everything that's changed since Montreal, which was our meeting last November. And then we'll have time for open issues at the end. Next slide, please. One small change that we had, we were talking about the working group facilitator. We added a mention of moderator next to that. Someone realized later that that actually wasn't the right fix. So we have another fix that we'll discuss in a later slide. But that is what's in -01 for now. Next slide, please. And another one, over the updates, we had at some point added a reference to RFC 7322, which, as you can imagine, did not exist for the original 2418. And the discussion kind of decided that we didn't really need that reference anyway. It's just a style guide, that's just guidelines. So we just ended up removing it because it wasn't helpful. Next slide, please. Similarly, or not that similarly, we had a lot of text that described individual drafts in this document, and it was kind of duplicative of what we had in 2026 BIS. So we said, let's just delete that and instead have a reference. So again, simplifies things and puts all the knowledge in one place. Was a simple PR. Next slide. Another one in terms of matching reality, there was a lot of text in 2418 about how to schedule working group meetings, and all of it involved emailing agenda@ietf.org, which is something that we haven't done in at least a decade because we have better tooling. So we had a PR that pretty much just removes all of those and just mentions that the chairs request sessions through the secretariat and is not prescriptive about tooling. We might update that later. The details don't need to be in the RFC anyway. Next slide, please. Another one is, these are like the 6 and now 7 items that are mentioned in 2418 about what should be discussed in charters for new working group. There was a request to add privacy next to security, and we have kind of some precedent there thanks to 6973. So we just added a privacy bullet in there. It's not particularly normative list, but a good thing to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Someone mentioned that the word staff used in like 3 places in the document was a little confusing because in other standards bodies, staff is often a paid position, whereas at IETF, our working group chairs and other roles are not. So we replaced that with the word role. Editorial change. Next slide, please. Another aspect, so I forget the number of the RFC, but many years ago, we removed the draft standard from the Internet Standards Track. And so that's been kind of cleaned up in 2026 bits already. But 2418 was still mentioning that in 2 places. So we had a PR that kind of cleaned that up. And part of it was kind of some text about working group being dormant, so that we can progress a standards track document to the next stop on the standards track. In practice, that hasn't been done in years. I don't think I've seen it happen in a decade.
I'm not sure I can easily talk, but we did it in our MCAT recently.
Oh, but was that group dormant before then, or was it just an active group? Okay, so it's still happening.
We didn't hear the actual.
Yeah, sorry, let me repeat what Colin said. So that was Colin Perkins saying that in what working group?
RMCAT.
RMCAT, that they actually did this. So that's helpful. Thanks, Colin. So we kind of tweaked that text. Maybe we can put some of it back then. We have a new PR that will kind of mention that once the working group is closed, you can still have the mailing list open, because that's easy and pretty commonly done. Next slide, please. So there was some text in 2418 that tried to explain consensus a little bit and said, well, 51% doesn't mean consensus, but 99% doesn't mean that either. It was a little bit confusing. We decided instead to, since this is not normative anyway, to reference Pete Resnick's very good RFC 7282 instead, which kind of goes into way more detail about how consensus works in the IETF, instead of having this odd sentence that tries to encapsulate it. Ecker, go ahead.
Why do you say this isn't normative?
There aren't any 2119 keywords in 2418, or actually there are, sorry. Good. The text that I deleted didn't have any 2119 keywords. Let's say that.
I agree with that, but I actually object to referencing 7282. So, I think there's a lot of very misleading stuff in there that actually we don't do, and I regret that I didn't object to it when it's published. But I'll notice it does not. It actually quite carefully says that the contests do not have consensus. That merely there's consensus to publish it, and so I really strongly object to actually uploading it here.
Even if we include it in the current form, which is to say that it says for examples of how to reason about. Do you still object to that reference?
Yes, I think something's just wrong. I think the stuff about like 99, if like 999 people think one thing and one person thinks the other thing, that can be consensus in the one, that's just like wrong. And we don't do it, and like we shouldn't say it. So no, right. I just any reference at all to 7282.
Okay, that's
unless you want to say it's wrong, which I'd be fine with.
I don't think it would be helpful to include it and say it's wrong. Okay, I think we might can I ask you to follow an issue on that, and let's keep
so we have
sure,
because I think it's
two people in the queue.
Myself
first and no chair hats, but just observation that the reference is informative in the current text.
That makes me no happier.
Yeah, so I think what I was going to say was it sounds like that there's been clarification that there had been a normative statement, even if it didn't have RFC 2119 language in it. So it shouldn't be taken out. I think there's an open working group discussion about whether or not it's helpful to refer to the more detailed document. And I think that is still an open working group discussion, although clearly Eric doesn't think so. Doesn't think it should be referenced. So, David, I think that means that this needs a little bit more work in terms of reframing it.
Yep, I absolutely agree. Especially the definition of consensus is one of our core tenets, so that deserves our time and attention to get it right. So absolutely, I'm down to spend more time on this one. Colin, you're gonna have to come up here to the mic though.
near do I have to get before I
No,
just leave me?
No, that's good.
This is good. So I agree that 7282 cannot be a normative reference and doesn't have IETF consensus, and it explicitly says that in it. I do not agree with Echo that it is incorrect and that the 1%, 99% thing is wrong. I think we do that all the time. So I think we need some more discussion here. And I think that this is one of the fundamental things about how the IETF works. So we really need to get it right. And maybe that should be a separate document. I don't know, rather than a small part of it.
Definitely agree with that.
Miria is next.
Yeah, Mirja Kühlewind. So 7082 has IETF consensus. It has a preamble saying this is not a BCP, it's an informal reference on purpose, but then it further says it has IETF consensus, so I don't see a reason why we shouldn't reference it. We can discuss if we want to revise 7282 because we don't agree to it anymore, but it has consensus and we should treat it like that.
Didn't we say that 7282 didn't have consensus? I'm going to reread it more thoroughly, but like, okay, let's take it to an issue. I think this one deserves more conversation. Or Ecker? Actually finding the text. So I think there are 2 points. One is I agree with Colin that we will sometimes let a single dissenter stop something from going forward if their arguments are strong enough. What I do not agree with is the claim in 7282 that we will sometimes say that you can advance the document, you can go that not only is the 1%er right, this thing can stop. Yes, but also that you can declare consensus and say, oh, there are people who are wrong, and they shut up. And the point, and I was going to quote the text that Mike Bishop just quoted in the chat, which is this document is quite consciously important information. It was not present any IETF process is different out of PCP. It's simply a collection of principles, hopefully around which the IETF can come to at least rough consensus. So I don't think that. So there was consensus to publish. That doesn't mean consensus on the thing itself. So I think that's what I got back in the queue to say. Well, that and the 1% thing.
Yeah, so I think this is another issue where discussing around the text on the slide is going to send us in circles. So David, I think you have the right of it. It's another request. Send text and we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to put Pete on the spot today, but I will ask you to comment on the issue, Pete. I would love to have your thoughts as well. All right, next slide, please. All right, so 2418 never mentioned the concept of a working group adopted document. It is something that every IETF working group uses that our tooling and the data tracker supports. And that is an integral part of our process. So I wrote a PR to actually define adoption. That's the extent of the paragraph. Pretty much it just says that working groups can adopt documents, and what that means is that the working group has change control. Anyone have thoughts and opinion on that?
Do we have to do any work to define?
Speak up. I'm not sure the microphone can pick you up.
Is there any work that we need to do to define hands over change control to the working group?
And for the sake of the note taker, we're going to need a name for the speaker.
Deirdre Connolly.
Not in this current PR. It doesn't define it any more than this. Are you suggesting we should?
I mean,
Well, 2026 says that anything that goes forth as a standard has to meet the necessary IPR requirements. So I think that may be enough.
What does that have to do with change control?
yeah.
Because you're giving the right in the IPR you're giving the right, you have to IPR requirements and the rights you are granting to the IETF. Both things are mentioned.
Yeah, but that's different from change control. I think
No, because you're giving the right, one of the rights you're granting to the IETF is them to modify it.
Okay.
And we have a queue. Ecker is next.
all right,
sorry.
Ecker, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this text is fine, but I think we probably are going to need to be clear about what is required for adoption and whether there's a working decision that needs to be taken by consensus. And when I read the text of 2418, the current 2418, it appears to me that all major substantive working group decisions are taken by consensus. And the question is, does this become such a working group decision? And we've already seen this be relevant to at least one working group in the past, 3 months. So I think it's probably kind of important to actually not just leave that be, not just leave that be empty.
And just to make sure I'm understanding you correctly, Eka, you're saying that we should say that working group adoption is a decision taken by the working group as consensus of the working group, sorry. Right?
I believe we should say that, but I think either we should say that or we should say it is within the unilateral grant of the chairs. But we should not do is be silent. So if we're voting or taking a hum, I'm humming for say it has to be by consensus. I think that's what it should be. But I think it'd be better to say it was within the unilateral grant of the chairs than to say nothing at all.
Okay. My gut feeling would be to say that it is a consensus decision, because that's how every working group I know operates. So if anyone disagrees with that, please get in the queue to say so.
I guess I would observe that the recent response by the ISG to an appeal suggests that they believe perhaps it is not.
All right, then I think I need to read up on that. Okay, Pete.
Yeah, I definitely have been part of working groups which do not do a formal call of consensus for adoption. It's just simply a relatively new practice, new past decade, but it is certainly not universal. It's still the case in some working groups that in the room, enough people do not motion violently against adopting, and the chairs say, okay, this seems like a fine starting point. There was the whole discussion of adopting a document can be assigning an editor and starting them with a blank page. This is just, this would be new. So I would prefer to have it clear that it's not necessarily a consensus call by the working group.
And so, Pete, before you go, we should define it as a decision of the chairs then?
I think
or something
so.
else?
I think I would be fine with that. I think there is something implicit in 2418 that the chairs are supposed to take the lead from the working group. And so I'm less queasy than Ecker about just letting it be silent on the topic. But if we're going to say something, saying that the chairs can make a call to assign a document editor and take it on as a work item is probably closer to the truth. And,
Okay,
or we can say the chairs can do that, and may ask for working group consensus to adopt a document, something like that.
I mean, it makes sense. Like the chairs pick document editors unilaterally. And so having this in that same vein is reasonable to me. Yeah. Maria?
Mia Kühlewind. I totally understand the desire to say something about adoption because we use it very often and it's weird to not say anything about it. But I would rather say less than more here because effectively it's not really part of the standards process in the sense that at the end of the standards process, you have to have consensus in the working group and you publish the document as standard, and that's the important part. Like anything else like this is more kind of how we internally organize our working groups and make ourselves, more comfortable or finding a better process to move forward. So it's not really a requirement of the standards process. And I think the point about change control is actually wrong. So as soon as you submit a draft, you give change control to the IETF. You can just take the text and work with it, find new editors or whatever. It's just a matter of how we are handling things that authors of a document, I think, are more careful. As long as it's an individual document, you just freely edit things. And as soon as you have a working document, you try to more carefully look for working group consensus and update based on that. But that's also because at the end, the working group has to decide if it wants to approve the document for publication. And if you don't do that, it will not happen, right? So it's like this is how we handled it, but it's not really a formal requirement. So I wouldn't put it in this document.
Thanks. If I can respond as editor, I think the fact that we had an appeal on a document adoption recently indicates that probably we should say a bit more, my personal opinion. Go ahead, Fluffy.
I think I was going to poke on this change control thing. I don't think change control is the right metric for what you're trying to hit at here. I think it actually, because everybody has to change control in many ways to every document. I think the thing that is important about a working group document is that at some level, to the best of its ability, it's trying to reflect working group consensus. And maybe I'm wrong about that. I've seen several working groups lately where they do not try to have the document, reflect working group consensus. But I think that is the important thing that we sort of need to come down on and figure out a little bit here. And I think that traditionally in many working groups I've been in, it's been like, yeah, the document represents working group consensus. So I think that might be a better way to poke for the definition of how to write this. Thanks.
And we can say things a bit more vague in terms of aims towards the consensus of the working group, because I think it's very common. Take, for example, I landed this PR. No one objected it when I landed it. Clearly, it doesn't have working group consensus based on the discussion we're having today. So it kind of equalizes over time, but might not be true at every single point along the way. So that, but I can take a stab at incorporating that in terms of consensus more than change control.
Okay. So, Lars Eckert, Mozilla. I want to get us away from the adoption, because I think that's actually the wrong way to think about this, right? Mirja already said that typically, if you don't have a non-derivative rights clause on it, and you need to take that off before the IETF group can take it, you already have given change control to the IETF, not the working group, but the IETF as a whole, and any participant. So really, what this document adoption short phrase is meant to describe is that the working group has decided they're going to start a working group document on this topic, and they've decided to take your text as a starting point. And conveniently, you're probably available as an editor, so you're going to stay editor. But you can think of it as a new document starting that has text from an old document with an editor set that's the same. But it's a new document, and nothing gets adopted, right? It's simply the decision of the working group to take a proposal that's written down by a bunch of people and take that forward in the working group. And I think if we rephrase it that way, we're gonna eliminate a lot of these problems.
Thanks, that makes a lot of sense.
And I'm just observing that I locked the queue because the queue is already long and there's more issues to get through. So go ahead, Martin.
Okay, I put it in the chat, but I don't like the word owned here, where it says a draft owned by an individual. I would just write this as individual draft because that's what they're called. And also usually, or in many cases, it's not just a single individual that works on these. So that's a little bit of a problem. So thank you.
So, sorry, I'm not sure I'm understanding the change you're requesting. Like, you want us to rename IDs to something else?
No, I just want in the text, instead of saying the main difference between a draft owned by an individual and one and so on, to the main difference between an individual draft and one adopted by a working group.
Oh, I see. The difference between an individual draft and a working group document. Yep,
Yes.
that makes sense to me. I can change that. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, next slide, please. Design teams. So the 2418 mentioned them already. We still make use of them quite regularly. Folks have pointed out that we don't put any constraints on design teams in 2418 specifically, but working group chairs generally do in practice. In particular, we ask the design teams to write down who was in them and what their contributions were. Specifically because of IPR and other reasons, code of conduct and whatnot, which are concepts that kind of arrived to the IETF after 2418 was published, which is why I wasn't there in the first place. So I wrote up this paragraph that just says, design teams must produce public records to ensure that contributions follow the rules. And then there's an example about IPR. Does anyone have thoughts or comments on that one? Go ahead, Joel.
Well, I find myself torn by this. In principle, I like it, but then I look at the practice. I don't know and have not known who were on the design teams behind certain documents. I know who they chose to list as authors. I am fairly confident in some cases that that is not all the people who were involved in the design team that led to the document. As long as we get the rights, I don't care. So I'm a little nervous this doesn't comport with reality, even though I like the idea.
Okay. That's fair. That might be a change. What do other folks think? Colin?
Yes. Hi, Colin Perkins. I was going to say roughly the same thing. I think this is probably how things ought to work. I'm not convinced it's how things do work in practice, but I would agree it's how they should work.
So I guess question for the chairs in terms of our charter or for our responsible AD, does this fit within our mandate or is this outside of it?
Yeah, I just hopped in the queue to ask kind of that same question. So this does seem to provide more guidance than is just an editorial merge. So I would wanted to kind of hear what is the basis we think we're threading some of that normative language in. Is it that something came out after 2418, which made it mandatory for everyone and it's a flow down then on a kind of all participants? Or is this kind of aspirational? In my kind of quick look, it looks more aspirational, but you've done the deeper archaeological survey. So we may have to defer this depending on kind of your analysis.
So I'm not a lawyer, but I have read BCP 79, and it kind of defines what a contribution to the IETF is, and the design teams being defined in an IETF document are an IETF venue, and therefore any contribution made in the design team is covered by the IETF IPR policy. I think that's fairly clear. Therefore, it would be a pretty big oversight if we had no way to enforce that policy. And the way we generally enforce it is by requiring people to name themselves when they make contributions. So I think it doesn't take too much squinting to think that that change happened in 79, would be my take.
Brian, you unmuted. You wanted to help in quickly? Or?
Yeah, I'm going to check some of the references there. I understand the logic. Thank you for explaining.
Yeah, it's Brian. I was just looking at 2418, and it says explicitly it is acceptable to have closed membership and private meetings, referring to design teams. So I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that you require them to publish everything. You know, I'm not against what you're proposing, but on the point of view of whether it's a change, I'm afraid, yes, it's a change.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, I agree that like the way you put it at the change in it probably goes beyond what you actually want to achieve. I think what we want is, or what we need is that we have a public record of the standards process so we can actually later on figure out like who contributed at what point of time. And I think the way we're doing this is that the design team as a team at some point reports back into the standard process. So like they give a presentation at an official session and that's how you produce a record. And I think that's very useful and that's really needed. And I think it's already covered by other documents. Like what you wrote here is more kind of saying you need to, every time you talk and you have a call, whatever, you also need to produce minutes or whatever. I think this is how you could interpret it.
No, that's
really
definitely not what I
that.
intended to say, to be clear.
Yeah, so I
if
think
that's what it reads like, to change it. Like in terms of the output of the design team, I think we're all in agreement that that is a single contribution made to the working group at the end, roughly.
Yes.
Unless the working group says go back to the design team. But I'm not saying that they need public minutes. Those contributions are already public at the end. The question is, who is behind these contributions? Is kind of the new change. Does that need to be documented?
So it's really just documenting who was member of the design team.
That's right.
Yeah, and okay, so I mean, actually, I think from a general perspective, that's very useful because that's the kind of record we need, right? And yes, I also remember that there was something in 2418 that says you can have closed design teams, but I think that was intended to say you have a closed membership, not like keeping it secret. So I don't think that is yeah. So
That's right. The fact that they can be closed doesn't mean it needs to be secret. Absolutely.
Exactly. So like what you need is a list of members and you need a final outcome that you feed into the working group. That's the two things you need.
Pete.
I got lost somewhere, and maybe David can help me. I think most of this is covered elsewhere. BCP 79 defines what a contribution is, so repeating it in the context of design teams doesn't matter. Producing public records of their contributions is already said in 2418. So the only question now is secret memberships. Is that actually formally forbidden in anything? Or is this brand new, we want a new requirement, in which case I think that is out of charter.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Maybe here I can describe it in the negative. Like here's a bad scenario. Let's say this working group on this topic decides to form a design team, and Colin, Lars, Deirdre, and I go and form a Tokyo design team to solve this problem. And we go and have lunch, and we come back and write an email to the working group that says, here is our solution. It's this paragraph. And it comes out a year later that actually Lars had a patent on half of that paragraph and is trying to exercise it. Of course, this isn't a technical document, so now I'm in nonsense. But then we get an IPR issue out of that. And then someone says, well, you didn't disclose it, therefore, like, you can't use it against us, is kind of what this is trying to avoid. But you're right, maybe it does end up being a new requirement then.
So now, wait a minute. What you just described it as a design team is just a few individuals making a contribution. What 2418 describes as a design team, I believe, is designated by the chair as an official design team.
The chair nominated us in this hypothetical scenario.
I'm not convinced that what you've described is anything new, right? I mean, if anything comes into the working group by any mechanism and a member of the working group does not disclose what they're supposed to disclose, they're in trouble, whether it's a design team or an individual or anything, or, an advisor that's assigned by the area director. I'm not clear that we need to say anything about the rest. The only question that seems relevant from here is the secret membership bit, and I don't see why that's a problem either. If the output is going to be someone's going to make a contribution, who's going to make that contribution? At least one member of the design team. And I don't care if you as a member of the design team went to run off and talk to Barry about what should go into the contribution to the design team, or whether the chair said, Barry, go help them. And I never found out it was Barry. If you're going to present it, you've taken on the responsibility of making a contribution, and Barry, as a member of the design team, has an obligation to disclose. I'm not sure I see the problem.
All right, I'll try one last time to see if I can get it across, because it could be that I'm completely confused as well. Is that, let's say the chairs have selected us as a design team and picked me as the chair of the design team, and I come back and I present to the working group our output. The question could become, like, have we laundered that contribution, in that someone could say it wasn't mine, it was David's contribution. I could imagine a way we paint ourselves out of this corner is to just kind of remove the first bit and just say contributions made within design teams are IETF contributions and need to follow the rules, and we leave it at that. That way it's kind of clear, and if anyone kind of maybe that's enough. And it sounds like making the records of membership is outside a charter, so maybe we just kind of put that in the trash then, and that we call that good enough.
Yeah, Dusty Daigle is in queue. I think I put myself in queue to respond to the question from some moments ago of what do the chairs think of this? Is this beyond the scope? And I think the text on the screen is beyond the scope of the work of this working group. I think others have sort of pulled the problem apart nicely, pointing out that the two key issues are IETF, IPR, and also delivery into the working group process of any results. So I think you are on the track to find something that might be an appropriate clarification in 2418. And I think it's potentially worth flagging, issues to work on elsewhere, else when, whether or not there's more clarity needed around design teams and how to manage them effectively in the context of the process. Anyway, that's where I
Great,
think
thanks.
we'll land.
I think we're landing on a reasonable answer where we remove that requirement. That sounds fine by me. I'll write a PR. Eckert?
Yeah, I concur with that, I think, because I think it does hit the scope. I do think that it would be good for the chairs to be required to formally designate design teams. Sorry, if they are creating them. Like I think that, like, honestly, I think this text is kind of like the text you have, not the text that the text that exists now or the text you have, actually is kind of weak, because there really is a thing where the chairs say, Alice, Bob, and Charlie are going to go off and do something and come back, and we're going to listen to them when they come back, and versus Alice, Bob, and Charlie go off on their own and come back and have their idea. Those really are different things. And I think that the second has some formal status, even though even though it's such a working group consensus, I think everyone knows that. And that's why, if that happens, people kind of defer to those design teams quite a bit. So I do think they'd be better in some future world to require those to be actually identified and named as you suggest. But I think there's not an IPR issue other than the usual IPR issues here. So I think that for the purpose of this, we should leave it as it is.
All right, thanks. Jay?
Thanks. Jay Daly, IETF Executive Director. Back in 2023, there was a joint IAB IESG.
Speak closer to the mic, please, Jay.
Back in 2023, there was a joint IAB IESG retreat under the then chair, some guy Lars Eggert, you may have come across. And I was tasked with getting legal advice on a whole series of questions related to design teams. And I have that legal advice in front of me. I'm not going to share it because I don't necessarily want to disclose it all. But one element I will point out is that when you read the documents, design teams are described as subgroups of a working group. And that then could lead people to believe that they are therefore clearly part of the process, and therefore that all policies apply, not just the IPR policies. But I think given the sensitivity of this, it's probably best if I share this advice with Roman and let him decide what he wants to do with that, potentially with the chairs as well, and let them go with that, okay?
Thanks. That sounds great. And I think I was at that retreat, but I don't remember the. Yeah. Lars says he is safe. We don't remember what was said though. So yes, please, Colin.
Hi, Colin Perkins. So just on Ecker's previous point, I would probably agree that design teams ought to be appointed by the chairs. That's not what 2418 says. So if we are making that requirement, that would be a change. With regards to the text on the slide, I think the clarification here should be that the outputs of the design team are contributions which must have a public record and not the discussion. And I think that's what caused some of the confusion.
Yep. No, and I'm realizing that my first sentence, I did not do a great job on that. So apologies for the confusion. Barry.
This is Barry Lieba. So you touched on this in your response to Pete, I think, earlier. So this is going to be short. I think this whole paragraph can be replaced by something that says that work within the design team is considered an IETF contribution, and the output of the design team is subject to the consensus of the working group. I mean, those are the 2 points that we really need to make.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's the simplest way out of this. All right, next slide, please. All right, so congratulations everyone on the publication of RFC 9945. ModPod is a reality. That's amazing. And now in 2418, since that document discusses disruptive behavior, we can remove that text and point to 9945 instead. That's what this sentence does. Hooray. Next slide, please. Oh, this is the fun one. So there's a bunch of open issues around the topic of what, like so 2418 just defines the authority of a working group chair, and then explains that some sub-portions of that authority can be delegated to others. And then there's a whole set of roles for this. Working group facilitator, so moderator is not in 2418, that's in 9945. The administrator, also 9945, refers to the administrative mailing list. Technical advisors are mentioned. That's actually not delegated by the chair, it's by the area director. There's mention of consultants and secretaries. Some of these roles are used extensively. Some of them, we haven't found a record of them being used in the last quarter century. But the discussion we had in Montreal was that we wouldn't remove them because that would be a change that's outside the charter. But kind of after going back and forth on a bunch of these issues, I tried to write a PR that solves all of them. And then I have 3 or 4 slides to go over it, and you can all tell me why I got it wrong. But here's the concept of what I tried to accomplish. I took multiple of these subsections that define these roles and kind of smushed them into one that I called Working Group Chair Delegation. And a bunch of the text is moved. It also mentions new fora, such as GitHub and other elements that, like 9945 mentions these and explicitly says that those are managed by the chairs or can be managed by administrators or the moderator team. So we kind of bring that concept in as well, and also reference BCP 245, which is RFC 9945. All right, I've split the PR into multiple slides, so it's not as much of an eye chart. Bear with me as I get through it, and then ideally we go for comments after I've gone through it, or no, actually do comments as they come up. Next slide.
I think we should do the whole thing because I know I've got questions that you may be about to answer.
Okay, then let's do the whole thing. Sounds good. All right. In these, text in yellow is text that was changed. Text in green is text that was added, and text is red is text that was removed. So the first bit here in yellow is mentions that instead of saying mailing lists everywhere, it says public fora, and it defines what that means, which is the list, chat groups, GitHub, GitLab, etc. And then separately, it adds a reference to 245 saying the way you handle disruptive behavior on these online forums documented over there, go read that. Next slide. All right, so this is now this new section. I changed the name of the subsection to mention chair delegation. And this text used to be in the working group secretary subsection. So what I did is I moved it here and I added the sentence in the middle to say this role is named working group secretary. So this is not any kind of normative text. It's just moving text around to make it easier to digest. Next slide, please. Sorry, Robert, that's a good point. That said, maybe I don't have any red text, and hopefully the yellow and the green can be told apart. All right, third part. This one is about the role of the facilitator. Similarly, instead of being in the subsection title, it is now as a sentence in the middle of the paragraph, and also a reference for BCP 245, because that's where that is actually formally defined. Next slide, please. And then Similarly, the working group consultant subsection, someone mentioned that we have technical advisors in our process. It's supported by the data tracker. It's not mentioned in 2418, but it mentions a consultant, and they're defined to be the exact same thing. So I just added a, hey, by the way, we call this technical advisor sometimes, since those roles are the same thing, to make it easier. Next slide, please. I think that was all of it. Okay, yeah, and this is my summary slide for, you can go forward one, because that's the overall summary for this. All right, thoughts, comments, Deirdre?
Deirdre Connolly, on the public fora, chats, etc. There are lots of chats that cannot have like a URL to a conversation that has happened somewhere, sometime. That includes the official IETF Slack, that includes Zulip. Like maybe the URL exists for a certain period of time, but I wouldn't be surprised if it went away. I might suggest cleaning up the specific language there, because there's a difference between mailing lists hosted by the IETF, GitHub, and other places that feel public that are harder to be like, yeah, we talked about it over here. Oh wait, that got cleaned up by the tool, and so we might need to clean that up a little bit.
So in terms of cleaning that up, I think all I'm doing here is kind of reusing text from 9945, which that's kind of the normative reference for the part of the chair's job is to moderate the GitHub, for example. I think you're raising a good point, which is that it might be hard for a chair to moderate something with disappearing messages, but I think that might be out of scope for what we're doing here, because conceptually this is just pointers to already decided things.
Yes, but for some of the consensus calls that we've just had, which not everything in every working group does a consensus call or whatever, but like being able to refer back with like a URL reference to such and such a thing that is like part of the debate and discussion of the working group was very, very important.
Yes.
And like for us, it was either, if it did not go to the mailing list, which has a IETF operated mailing list and URL indexable reference to basically every message, if not, why not? Because having a URL to that discussion about the debate of the working group was very important. So not so much the moderation of the behavior, but like, oh, why are you having an official working group conversation over there in a place where we don't have a record of it? That's the vibe I'm trying to convey. So yes, this is stuff that's already been decided somewhere else and we're just shuffling around the language, but I'm new here. So I'm just noticing this for the first time.
You're new, you've only been here for 5 years.
Well, to this working group.
I think I agree with everything you said. I'm not sure it would lead to a change in this PR necessarily.
Okay.
So maybe, but if you find some text that you think we should change, if you can either send me a PR an issue, I'm happy to look into it. It's just, I'm not sure, like it might be a normative change that's outside of scope of this document.
Okay.
Because we're like, our charter very much constrains what we're allowed to do. Cool. Leslie.
Yeah. So a couple of things. I think my first comment may overlap somewhat with what Deirdre was saying, but I was distracted by the volume issue. I don't think your text for the other fora stands as written because it's way too vague. Like, am I supposed to go off and find all the Facebook groups that happen to be talking about the MOPS working group and make sure they're all talking nicely? There needs to be some way to scope it to blessed IETF fora, and I appreciate the desire to not just call it mailing lists everywhere, but some scoping is necessary, I think. And then the other,
but if we called it like IETF public fora, and then as an example we mentioned mailing lists and GitHub, would that be okay?
I think that's fine, but I think it's, as I said, it has to be blessed in some way, or even the fora as listed on the working group page, for instance, right? Like we list the Git fora, the GitHubs now. So
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I want to make sure like we're not too prescriptive, because like the working group page is a concept that's not in any of our documents. Yeah. But I think that makes a lot of sense to scope it down. Yeah, I'll look at what 9945 said about it.
Then the other comment was on the technical advisors for the working group. I think it would be cleaner just to say that area directors may also appoint named roles, and just leave it at that. The only thing that's important to note there is that they don't have any special role with regards to the working group process. And I'm saying it that way because I think technical advisors are, I think my other working group has one. I think that partly it's a means for the area director to get to give them some status, for instance, ability to approve content to the meeting working groups, but they aren't otherwise blessed as part of the process. And similarly to not wanting to make the fora over prescriptive, I wouldn't want to make the roles as appointed by the area directors overly prescriptive either. I'm sorry, that was incredibly vague. It seems to be jet lag o'clock.
I think I agree with everything you said, but I might request an issue or a PR just to make sure I get your change right. Because part of the reason I added technical advisor as an example in there is that if someone is Command F searching for it in the RFC, they'll be able to find it. And I felt like that wasn't being more prescriptive, just to use as an example. If anyone says, well, I'm the technical advisor, what does that mean? You can search for it, was kind of what I'm going for.
And it took some mailing list discussion to get us to remember that that was not, in fact, a working group chair devolved role. So I think it's fine to mention them. We just need to be a little bit careful. Barry, we've got a request from remotes that if we could speak closer to the mic, which I'm clearly not doing. Apparently, in-room voices are a little faint remotely.
Okay, then we will blast out the room. Leslie, can you move back to part 1 slide? This is Barry Lieba. I think Leslie covered most of what I wanted to say about this. The general comment that I have to make related to that is that we want to keep to concepts and not be too specific about implementation. So examples are fine, but trying to be too specific will lock us in unnecessarily. Knit, please avoid constructs like such as, etc. You don't need both. But, and I agree with what Deirdre said about the ephemerality of some of these, so we might want to be careful about our examples. Next slide. Yes, editing working group documents is not a working group secretary thing. So that should be maybe managing working group documents is what you want, being able to change the data tracker stuff about that. But you're not talking about being the editor of a working group document. That's not a secretary role.
I agree with you, but that's what 2418 says. This, like, if you look at this text, 2418 has, you delete chair delegation, you put in WG secretary, and then you delete that yellow line at the bottom. That's what's in 2418 right now.
Okay, but then it's wrong relative to what we do now. The editors of a particular working group document are assigned by the chairs, and they are not any of these named roles. So
and the subsection right before this one, or either right after, is the one about working document editors. But I agree with you that it is weird that editing working group documents is part of the working group secretary role.
Yeah, I think it probably means managing the working group documents, as in dealing with the data tracker stuff.
Yeah.
So we might want it may just be a tweak in the wording of this to make that clear, but that's what stood out to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. Maybe if we replace the word editing with process managing or some better word, that would solve it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Colin Perkins, can you hear me?
Maybe a little louder.
A little louder
and closer.
Get a little closer. I'm just looking here. So I guess two things on the public fora. I don't know if we put requirements on those fora anywhere, but we should be having requirements for archivability and record keeping and so on for the types of fora a working group can officially use. And that was certainly the case with mailing lists, and I know it's the case with the IETF provided chat and with the GitHub, which are archived by the Secretariat. But if we're expanding that out to other fora, we maybe need to put a requirement that the group make sure that records are kept. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, I think certainly the role of working group secretary as defined here is narrower than I have seen it used in subgroups. And in some groups, I've seen the secretary do things which are called the facilitator in the other slide. And maybe that's okay because it's, it's just the same person could be called two different things, but it's not quite representing how it's been run in practice. Yeah, I've seen secretaries doing agenda management, for example.
Yeah. Fair. So on the first point, I think having limits on what public fora we can use makes sense, but I think it might be out of scope for our current charter.
Yes, that is definitely out of scope, and I trust that the IETF, when they pick a particular tool or fora, they will think about this and do the right thing. And so we are only here to specify what the working group process is, and the chairs are responsible for using the tools, the fora blessed by the IETF, and IETF will figure out which ones those are.
Yeah. So we need to make sure this document says these are blessed fora, not just any fora.
Yeah, so actually Roman put the text from 9945 in the chat, like working group selected unlike public fora or something like that. And so I think that's the extent to what is in scope for this PR conceptually.
Yeah, it just can't select any fora, it has to select one which is blessed by the
Yes, no, absolutely. And I will tweak that language to make sure that we reflect fora that are selected by the working group chairs as official fora. All right, Miriam.
Mia Kuhleben. So again, I understand the desire to document the things we are actually using and like define these terms somewhere because that's helpful. But I think this document should really kind of focus on what is actually part of the process. Because if you put it in a document, it's written in stone, it's hard to change and it doesn't age very well. So whatever you put here, you will have the same problem in like 5 to 10 years. And I think this is something we didn't get right all the time in the past. So in this case, I actually would like to see a lot of this text simply removed because it's really kind of inside baseball. Like what we need to say is, I think this is in line with Leslie, is that you can delegate, and how you name that role, that's basically, usually it's somebody who implements a data tracker who decides about the name or something like that, or comes up spontaneously. And like, this is also the place where I think we need to document it. Like if you see something in a data tracker and it doesn't have any explanation, I think that's the problem we have. But the RSC should really concentrate on the process and not more.
So I agree with you from a conceptual standpoint. I say if we weren't coerced by the charter, that's I think what would be the optimal outcome. But between the charter and because we had a whole discussion in Montreal about should we remove the working group facilitator role because we're not aware of anyone using it, and kind of the result of that conversation was that we don't it's not an editorial change and we should just leave it in. And then we realized on top of that 9945 references the facilitator as a example of something. So if we remove it, that'll make that more confusing. So I totally agree with you. I can try to make this a bit more vague, but I think having the names in there, we're kind of stuck with them to some extent.
I'm not sure if maybe it's for the chair to decide, but I'm not sure this is what the charter gives us because it's kind of still updating with reality. And if we think reality is that this is actually only internal process, it doesn't need to be documented in RFC, that's what we should do.
Okay, that's fair. Thanks. All right, next slide, please. Actually, get past the part 4 and then the summary and on to the next one. There we go. Thanks. Virtual buffs. So we talked a little bit about this in Montreal. 2418 has text about buffs and has some pretty strict rules there, is that you should have 1 buff and you might be allowed to have 2, but 3 is right out. And it explicitly says 1 slot at 1 IETF plenary meeting. Since then, we've had virtual buffs outside of plenary meetings. And so this kind of falls into our reflecting reality umbrella. How do we want to fix that? Because right now, what we're doing in practice goes against 2418. Another aspect about this is that the limit of 2 is kind of useless anyway. I've seen the area director get a third BOF. All they did was rename the working group, which then it became the first BOF. So in practice, this doesn't matter too much. My proposal is to just delete that parenthetical that says 1 slot at 1 IETF plenary meeting as the simplest way to resolve this. Lars.
Yeah. So I have 2 opinions. I agree and I disagree with you at the same time. So I think it's useful for ADs to have flexibility here. And in practice, they've been creative and that was great. It's also very, very useful for ADs to have a piece of text in an RFC to point to say, sorry, you can't have one. Because if it's purely up to the AD, they will be flooded with, please, 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 one more time. This time it'll be different requests. And while they can still decide to say no, it's going to make it a little bit more annoying. So I don't quite know how to thread this needle, but having some text that says 1 or at most 2 is actually helpful.
I'm not suggesting we remove that
okay,
text.
Sorry,
that's the text in white that's not changing.
Ah, okay, I'm sorry.
I'm just removing that it says that they have to be held at plenary meetings. The
Sure.
limit of,
okay,
to
yeah.
protect.
Do it. Yeah.
Cool, thanks. Anyone else have opinions on this one? Roman?
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify the intent here. If we don't remove the text, what this is saying is you can hold an infinite number of virtual interims, but you only get up to 2 slots at the face-to-face meetings, right? Because to my knowledge, this has not been abused in the sense of I have no instance where you virtual BOFed a lot of times, but you didn't blow your cap of the 2 face-to-face. So I think what we're seeing here, just to kind of finesse a little bit, I think this is a hypothetical situation we're trying to mitigate. To my knowledge, this has not happened in the past. The idea of renaming BOFs, more BOFs, I'm setting that aside. That's a different issue, but this finesse of virtual kind of not. So I'm trying to understand, what are we trying to kind of really reconcile? You get 2 of any form, or are we trying to kind of leave the virtual thing alone?
So my thinking is that what we've been doing recently is in violation of 2418. Because 2418, based on that parenthetical, to me reads as requiring BOFs to happen at plenary meetings. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter that much because BOFs are not a required part of our process. We have gates around working group chartering and approval of the charter by the ISG. The BOFs is an optional step along the way. So it doesn't matter too much, but I think the way we've been operating is in violation of this text is kind of how I read it and what I'm trying to rectify.
So again, I'm trying to understand what the end state is on deck. As I understand it, we've actually only had less than a handful of virtual interims. And so what I'm hearing is we shouldn't have had those. Those are not allowed by the RFC. And by making this text change, you're saying we can now have them?
That's what I'm saying, yes. And then we are also making it clear that now those count towards your limit as well. Whereas before, those were just not allowed.
Yeah. I guess I was asking that question wearing no hat, like putting my hat on. If we are clarifying the existence or absence of virtual kind of interims as a thing, this now feels like it's up against the charter scope.
Well, we have a caveat in our charter about reflecting reality.
Right. Yeah. I will also repeat what Lars kind of said, which is this idea of having ADs having the ability to point to an RFC to say you don't get another one is very, very, very extremely helpful in all forms. I can't say that more strongly.
Yeah, and again, I'm not proposing to change that. Michael.
Yeah, just a programming note before we go further. I'm hoping to have 30 minutes to go through Lars' document, so hopefully 6 minutes will be plenty of time to wrap up this
Well,
discussion. Thanks.
Good news, this is my last slide.
I am aware.
Michael, go ahead.
So the situation that I would like clarity on, and I have opinions about things, but your red text is probably okay to deal things, is where we have had call it side meetings, virtual side meetings in preparation for a BOF, which will be at a plenary week, and we have asked, well, we have issues with getting a proper record. This goes back to the previous conversation and what Deirdre brought up. And could we please use Meet Echo because it's the best tool we have that everyone understands and gets us a good record and is accessible actually through from many places in China where quite a number of other things are not. And then the response was, oh, that was going to count as your BOF. So I don't need to have more than one BOF, and the text there is not accurate about under unusual circumstances. Well, we almost always get two. So we could argue about that point, but I think we are doing ourselves a disservice by not allowing people, by forcing people to use unrecorded by IETF mechanisms to do their planning of the BOF. That's all. I don't care how we solve that, whether we just say they are not BOFs or we clarify something else. I don't care. But I think we're doing ourselves a disservice and not reflecting reality by doing that. And also accessibility to many people.
Well, I didn't know I was getting in line to disagree with MCR, but I guess I am.
We didn't just lose the remote, did we? Okay.
I didn't know.
I mean, David.
And we're back.
Okay, thanks.
Good. So I didn't know I was getting in line to disagree with Michael, but I guess I am. And then I'll say what I was going to say here. Like, I think it's bad enough that we give people like rooms at IETF to have their side meetings, and I certainly not think we should provide video conferencing support for their side meetings. We need to a sharp distinction between things that are IETF activities and things that are not. And things that are unofficial and do not have status are those things. On this topic, it seems to me that I see above that, like Colin suggests that he's not convinced virtual bots are a good idea. I'm also not convinced virtual bots are a good idea, and I think that the extent to which they're not allowed now, rather than reflecting reality, we should enforce this rule, not allow people to have them. So I don't think we should make this change. It seems to me we have a consensus document that says virtual bots are illegal, and we need consensus to change that, and we shouldn't.
So, yeah, I mean, so one of the interesting things about the way we operate is that the IESG is allowed to go against almost all of our rules if they call it an experiment. And I think that's how these virtual BOFs have been run. And that's how we can kind of square that circle. And so what you're saying is we shouldn't do that anymore. That's one.
I don't think they can do it as an experiment. I'm not sure they can do it as an experiment with an RFC. Can they? Like consensus call, which is on pure discretion? I don't think so.
It's how things have been operating for a while. The fact, for example, to give you an example from 2418, working charters that have milestones without dates. That's something that's a violation of 2418 that the ISG decided to have an experiment on that's been ongoing for 20 years, or maybe 15. Adam Roach started it, I forget when.
Well, in any case, well, I see Lars commenting here. But I guess I just don't agree with you, Lars. We can make exceptions when we need to. This is not at such a time. So, I guess the extent to which we're like actually asking for agreement with this, I disagree, and I'll go along with that.
That's fair. I'm hoping that I don't have to open that can of worms and not the can of worms of side meetings, which is an evergreen topic at every ISG retreat that I've ever heard. But anyway, sorry, Pete, go ahead.
Yeah, I get to disagree with both Ecker and Michael. We should stay out of the side meetings issue completely in this document. It's a can of worms. With regard to this, I think this is a match reality. The idea of a virtual BOF was non-existent at the time this was written, and we have virtual working group interims, which were also non-existent at the time of this document. We probably need to say how they work. I think the important point here is a BOF is a session where the IAB has gears that turn, where the IASG has gears that turn, where people are expecting the possible formation of a new working group, whether as a result of that BOF or down the line. And we should include those because they do exist now as part of reality in the limit of they're held only once. Under unusual circumstances you get two, and even though reality is you can get more, IASG members need to be very creative in order to pull that off. God bless. I think Ecker's right, though, in the sense that the IESG being a little too creative over the years has been a repeated problem. They're not allowed to do some of these things.
Jari, Jarkko, personal comment. Agree with Pete, first of all, and I think another way to describe this is that there's really two dimensions in discussion here. One is the officialness, and the other one is the virtualness. So we should totally ignore the things that are unofficial, like side meetings. That's not matter for this document. And it is a reality alignment indeed that things can happen either in person or in the virtual domain, and we should recognize that. And otherwise, this is not a change to the process, in my view, at least.
Thanks. Makes sense. Ecker's back.
Yes. So to clarify, my objection to the virtual BOFs is the following: that when the BOFs occur at the plenary meeting, people look at the agenda and they say, "This looks interesting. Maybe it's important. I'll show up," and you get a broad cross section of the community. In a virtual BOF, what you get is the people reading the mailing list and therefore are their proponents or strong opponents of the thing. And it's a completely different setting. And the purpose of the BOF is to cross-area review and vetting of the proposal against the community as a whole. Then it simply is not sufficient to say that simply virtual BOFs and in-person BOFs are different things. And so maybe it'd be a good idea to change that. But I agree with you, Colin. Like if the IETF were entirely virtual, that'd be fine. My objection is that it's not part of the plenary agenda. And so I think that in any case, I think it sounds like we have to resolve this at some future point, but I just wanted to get out why I'm objecting to this in the first place. I'm not just being grumpy.
Thanks. I guess this becomes a question for the chairs in RAD, which is, do we think our role here in this room is to reflect reality in the document or to address this hot topic and come to consensus on it one way or another? Because just thinking through it, if we can't come to consensus, I don't know what we fall back to. Is it what the document says or what we've been doing?
Dusty Daigle, speaking as chair. I think that part of the challenge is that we're not even agreeing on what has been practiced, right? Roman in the chat is citing numbers suggesting there, in fact, haven't been a lot of virtual BOFs. So my suspicion is that there's a little bit of conflation between side meetings and virtual BOFs, even though we agreed that side meetings are something we shouldn't touch. So I think it might be appropriate to, ask another question of the ISG in terms of what do they perceive the current reality to be, and make sure that the text reflects that so that we can all live up to what we think the current reality is. But that's just a thought off the top of my head. Miria?
So coming back to the point that really kind of focusing on what's actually mandatory process. This is all not useful because you don't need a BOF at all. You can rename your BOF or whatever. So this actually doesn't mean really that much in our process. I understand the point. I think that's an important point that Lars made, that it's actually useful to have something to point to. So in that sense, this is kind of like, you know, text that hopefully supports the work of the it makes the life of the IESG a little bit easier. So I actually think it's a good idea to ask the IESG what they prefer. In that sense, you know, keeping the text or removing the part in brackets, both is fine for me. I'm slightly tending to actually removing this part in bracket because I think we are agreeing that like the plenary meeting and everything we do at the plenary meeting shouldn't have a special standing in our process, and this is kind of conflicting with it. I understand that like the output you get from a BOF at a plenary meeting might be different from what you get at a virtual meeting. We understand this already reality, but for our process, the decisions are made online and it shouldn't make a difference.
Thanks. So where do I go from here as an editor?
Do you have a thought?
Yeah, I would say, given that I at least quickly can't find any evidence beyond the one I held for JWP, that this is something that reflects current practice if sample size equals 1. So I think we can invoke that in terms of the in terms of making that in charter. So we may have to defer this to another time to provide that clarity. And it may be an open question now whether it was even appropriate to have held that BOF.
Yeah, I don't think there were definitely no more than 3, and maybe it was just the 1 or 2. I don't think any virtual BOFs turned into working groups.
Yeah, again, just kind of quickly, I feel like there was more than 1, but that's the only one I can quickly find.
I remember when we were researching how to organize one, I was told that Francesca had pulled together the justification for it, and I think had held one. So we may be able to follow up from that.
Yeah, I vaguely recollect this something around Tigress Secret, maybe.
Oh yeah,
area.
Yeah.
Okay,
but also, given the time that it occurred, we could just say that that was a COVID era emergency.
I think this requires more research, more background research. And again, we're talking to text on a slide as opposed to really grasping the whole issue. So I think we've discussed this as much as is useful today.
Yep, that sounds good. I can do a bit more research and present that as a alongside a proposal, which might be still this. Sounds good.
No, that would be great. And it sounds like Roman has some work to do to help you with that, Roman and Mike. All right, Colin, do you really need to jump in the queue, or are we ready to move on?
He says no, so we can move on.
Great, thank you.
All right, Lars.
And thank you, David.
Okay, you can take this seat.
Right, hello. So this is still a personal document, which is why we're last, and we're also, I don't think I need the time. I know I'm going to eat those words in about 20 minutes, but I don't think we need that. So I wrote this draft when I was still chair, or I was getting out, because I sort of realized that there wasn't a lot of ability for the chair to actually delegate things, at least not officially, and I wanted to change that. Next slide. This is unchanged from last time, so the chair has many responsibilities. You're not allowed to delegate. It can cause overload, and for me, it certainly has at times, and it sort of also limits your ability to sort of define the role. And we can argue whether that's true. So there's a little diagram down there, and I think Ecker sent feedback that points out there's actually another arm that I'm missing, which is the special role of the chair in the appeals process. Except I couldn't find a source for the diagram anymore, so I didn't update it. The other thing is that the IETF chair is a single point of failure. There's no sort of defined way to have somebody else stand in if the chair can't do the job. The only option is a permanent replacement, and there's this midterm vacancy non-com process. So there's basically these two motivations. One is, I think Yari in an email called it sort of a workload caused desire to maybe delegate, and one is a sort of outside influences force a delegation because the chair is AWOL. Next slide. The motivation was to sort of fix this. I think the draft still looks at all the existing RFCs that have something to say about what the chair does and doesn't do, and sort of propose small tweaks that gives sort of, the intent here is sort of maximum flexibility. Let the chair really delegate all these different roles and sub-roles that are on the previous slide. And again, I'm going to point forward in time to Ecker's comments. Maybe we want to discuss if this maximum flexibility is actually something that is desirable, or whether there's some packaging of delegation, or the ability to not delegate is something that we want. But the draft at the moment still sort of allows the IETF chair to not also be the ISG chair, and it allows the IETF chair to not also be a member of the IAB, and it allows them to not also be the Gen AD at the same time. So that is this sort of what I would call like workload overload fixes, where a chair could say, I'm going to appoint this other person or other AD to be the IETF chair delegate on the IAB, for example. The other part was this: what happens if the chair can't do the work for being hit by a bus or something else going on? And that was the idea for this emergency stand. And there's been a change at the moment. The text says, and I stole this idea from Brian Carpenter, that the chair basically picks another, in parentheses, willing area director as their stand-in immediately when the chair gets seated, and at any time afterwards they can sort of change who that person is, who that area director is. And when something happens to the chair, then that person is chair either until the non-com finishes the midterm reappointment, or the non-com selected chair says, "Hi, I'm back." Yeah, that's what the document says. Next. I got a bunch of feedback. So since the 001, Brian sent some feedback. The most critical part here was this idea that was in 00 that the IAB chair would be the stand-in. And Brian proposed to make it simpler, because we had some discussions whether the IAB chair should really have a role in the standards process, because the IAB doesn't. Obviously, the IAB chair is on the ISG, so there's an argument for and against. But I personally liked the idea that you just name another AD better. And since this is at this moment still my document, I just stuck it in. We can take it back out if the work group in the process of adoption finds that this is not what they want. And there was some editorial fixes, because the document talked a lot about, it was written for being dispatched, and now that it has been dispatched, it changes the wording a little bit. Next slide. Ecker sent a really useful review last week, and I'm sorry that I haven't really replied to anybody on this. I was really busy, but I found it very helpful. And my attempt to sort of summarize this, and Ecker is on the call, so he can correct me and step in. It was really this sort of the separation of this emergency delegation from the workload-based delegation. I think maybe the draft should bring that out even more. I think Ecker pointed out that he does not like the new text that says pick another AD. He liked the original IAB chair better, but there's also maybe another option we can discuss here in the group. Ecker writes that the word incapacitated does a lot of heavy lifting. Like who decides it, and what does it mean? I agree. I did not feel like writing a lot of text there. But yes, we definitely, if we go this way, need to basically say a little bit more about the conditions. As I mentioned, I sort of wrote this with the intent of maximizing flexibility for the chair. And Ecker says some of these functions shouldn't be delegatable, and that is fair. We should discuss which of those we do maybe want to give the ability for delegation to the chair, and which of ones we don't. And I think sort of a subclause of that Ecker raised is that the chair really can, at least in practice, delegate by simply like not showing up. Like, if a chair felt the IAB was useless, why do they dial into the calls and go to the retreat and stuff? And you can make that argument, but it's difficult for the chair to actually do so because you're making yourself very recallable at that point. Because somebody can say, hey, he's supposed to be on the IAB, but you never show up. So that's not being a really good IETF chair, is it? Therefore, I felt like having a explicit way for the chair to say, I am shaping the role this way, and this role, this sub role in the IAB, for example, is being filled by this other person, would be cleaner. And then the special role the chair has in the appeals process, I think it was Yari who pointed out that the text says this, but I don't think in practice we have really ISG that I'm not on anymore. So the ISG, when I was on it at least, did not necessarily handle appeals that way. Part of that was probably because the chair was already overloaded, and so dealing with the few appeals that we have, by the way, just to throw Roman under the bus a little bit, the few appeals that we had at the time, I felt were already quite an additional workload, and dealing with them as chair first, rather than having the ISG as a whole jump on them, was not the best way to deal with this. And I think that's my last slide. And I have people in the queue. I'm sorry if you were going to comment on something earlier and I talked over you. Miriam.
Mia Kulevin, I joined the queue early because I wanted to make a point on the basically first or second slide. So here you have these three different things here, which is the ISG chair, the GenAD, and the IAB member. And these are not on the same level. So the ISG chair and the GenAD, they imply certain responsibilities, like as AD, you have to click the buttons and whatever. And if you're not able to do it, you have to find somebody to stand in for you to do that. But the IAB doesn't work this way. The IAB, the IETF chair, is a member of the IAB, and it's not like you are assigned a certain thing that somebody else needs to stand in for when you're falling off. And I think this is generally true for every IAB member. Like if some of the IAB members becomes inactive for a reason, it's not a problem. We can compensate for that. And I think we should treat it the same thing. Like the IETF chair is always the IAB member. You can't change that. And if you are not able to participate in the IAB, not a big problem. It's sad, but there's also the liaison, so there's still some kind of overlap and forth and back. So I think there's nothing you can do here.
Yes, that's true. I do think it's a problem though if we have a bunch of RFCs that's basically imply that the IETF chair is a full member on the IAB, and then they're just not showing up. As I said, right?
I think it's not. It's not like because
well, it might not be in practice, but if the role of the chair includes being a full member on the IAB, and then a given chair is not filling that role, you could argue whether that chair is actually fulfilling the role of the IETF chair as defined by current RFCs.
I mean, you always fulfill the role because you are a member. You're just not doing a good job because you're not doing anything, right? But that also happens for other IAB members, and we can cope with that.
Yeah, so it's not about that the IAB is not able to cope with it. I agree it is, right? But
I mean, like not
should
I think
should it have to
I
cope
think
with
also
it?
in the processes, there's nothing like it can happen that somebody disappears kind of, and we can handle the process around that. This is not special for the IETF chair compared to any other IAB member.
Okay.
I'll observe that
I don't think there's any text in any RFC that says that. That basically
Lars, you may not have needed 30 minutes for this discussion, but I was concerned the working group needed 30 minutes for this discussion or more.
Okay.
So I have at this point locked the queue because I think that we're going to run out of time. I don't mind other people joining at the end of the queue in case we do have time. But otherwise, I think we need to move on through the queue.
I had it
fair. Did you have a second point, Miriam?
Yeah. On the next slide, basically, I have an opinion here, but like my main point is really, I think this mechanism for emergency cases where you say, I have to name and pick somebody and there's a process behind it, that's the wrong way to approach it. Like in emergency cases, there should be one clear delegation without any action required at any point of time. And that's why I'm not happy that like you propose that the chair needs to pick another AD.
No, the picking of the other AD happens at the time the
I understand. I understand. It shouldn't be happen at the time where you fall away, because that wouldn't work. But I think there shouldn't be any picking. Like, there should always be a clear fallback path. Because if you forget to pick somebody, or if nobody's willing, or whatever, then you have the same discussion again. And this is really just an emergency case. So let's make it easy and just like define it. Like, this is the way it works, and we're done.
Okay.
Eric?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, the underlying thrust of my comments was that the chair is picked by the nomcom. It is a singular role, and there's an accountability structure where it's there picked, which does not apply. And so if Roman decides to nominate, the person who's just made, some AD as his, vice chair, they were not picked by the nomcom for that role. And it would, as you see in the chat, that would really quite change the calculus of people who are chosen. And it's not clear with the accountability structures, they do a bad job. And so, and you can say like, well, it's Roman's job to make sure they do, a good job. But like, well, I delegated the entire job of Gen AD or IETF chair to this person. Like, Roman was picked, so we wanted him to be IETF chair, not we wanted him to hand it off. And so I think basically, like, there are a number of things that like one can imagine doing here that like, that I think where it doesn't really matter, like RSAB and the LLC board, those things where you actually can like just sort of be like, this person really reps the ISG rather than repping their share specifically. And I think it'd be fine to like really hand those off. And say like the ISG selects this person and they can pick anyone they want. But I think that the notion that like, and I think, when Alyssa was on leave, I did actually kind of sit in the LLC for a while in her place. So I'm not sure if that was even allowed, but we just did it. We're at the LLC, but I guess I asked at that time. But like, I'm not really comfortable basically very much delegation of the chair of like these really quite explicit roles, which the chair was chosen for, as opposed to the roles that are kind of incidental.
Right. So I think I disagree on the LLC board, because I think that is actually the one role that I find very difficult to delegate, and that is already allowed. So which is why it isn't in a document, other than saying that the ISG can already do that. On the Gen AD thing, technically the ISG already has the ability to pick a Gen AD, because they can just empty out the Gen area, create Gen 2, tell the nomcom pick as an AD for Gen 2, and the nomcom will have to do that, and then the IETF chair is the Gen AD with no working groups. I thought it would be cleaner to make it clear that we want to just.
Well, I would note that would require the consent of the entire ISG, not the consent of the IETF chair.
Correct, but I doubt
that's a very different situation, isn't it?
So I doubt that the ISG would disagree if the IETF chair says I don't.
They should. Well, they
I don't want working groups in Gen.
Well, they should. So, and if they're not doing the job, then we should recall them. So, and I don't think it's the same at all.
So between these IAB, Gen, and ISG chair roles, are there any that you think are delegatable, or do you think they're all inherent?
The IAB one, I think we should just say, I think I take Miriam's point, but I think we should just like say that the IETF chair can show up on the IAB or not if they please. I just don't think it matters very much, right? I basically, like, my view is it doesn't really matter whether they show up or not to the IAB. And like, frankly, if they weren't ex officio, it would barely matter at all. So like, I think we should just like say like that's not like a real responsibility, and and then take the recall thing off the table. So yes, I think that's the one we should do. And again, I don't think it's a problem, like, if they do ask some other AD to pick up one of the working groups in Gen, but I think that they're ultimately responsible for like the question of who do I go to charter like my new working group that is like, to rip out 2026 and replace it with like absolute dictatorship of, it's the IETF chair. And I don't think that should be like a random person that like the IETF chair delegated.
But it would be another AD and not a random person. But point
I hear you, but I think it is really different to be like they're responsible for the question of whether the working group is chartered than the question of whether they're responsible for the working group once it has been chartered. I think those are quite different things. So I think that's the part that I think is inseparable. So, I guess I'd be happy to go through this in detail with you at some point if you want to have a call. But like I think that like many of these things, I think the core thesis, the core lens I'm looking at this through is what are the things in nomcom and things are selecting this person to do, and that they're accountable for. That's the lens I'm looking at this through.
Thanks. Yari.
Miria has a clarifying question for Eric.
Yeah, so I mean, a working group is chartered by the whole IHG, right? It's not the Gen AD, or what did you say?
I mean, the Gen AD is sponsoring it. If it would be incredibly inappropriate for the security AD to sponsor a process document, a document which is about the management of the IETF. It'd be incredibly inappropriate.
Nothing
I
preventing
disagree.
doing that though.
Okay, well, I'm not sure to tell you. The whole
Yeah,
point
they
of
are
area is to
speaking
have that
as
separation.
an individual. Sorry, did you want to continue? Yeah. Okay.
No, I'm
So,
good.
Yarek, speaking as individual for this topic, maybe focusing a little bit more on what you guys agree than what you disagree about, Lars and Ecker. I think obviously everybody seems to be of the opinion that we do need an emergency stand-in capability, and the differences are more in exactly who is that person, how that's selected, and so on. I actually don't care personally super much what the answer is. I have experienced that both as IETF chair, I would have known people in my team in the ISG that would be capable, and maybe future candidates for IETF chairs themselves. I could have relied on them. I would know that I can rely on the IAB chair, and maybe for an emergency situation, some number of weeks or a month or two would be okay. Of course, personal situations could be different for different people, regardless of what we write in this feature RFC. But I don't think that's totally impossible. So I think we quite okay. Eker, you asked about the definition of incapacitation. I really don't think we should go into the definition of what constitutes incapacitation. I would rather that we focus on who decides that. And I guess Lars's document was on one extreme, that, okay, the delegate decides that now we have the situation. The other option is that, okay, we run through the recall process. And maybe there's a third alternative that the ISG decides that now we have this situation. I may be more in the middle than on the two extremes here. Then on this workload-based delegation thing, obviously we need some more discussion, but maybe it would be useful to decide first what problem we're trying to address. Is this for a temporary situation that for 3 months we need to have somebody else do the Gen 80 job because of urgent stuff over there? Or is this for this person to be the IETF chair, and for that they absolutely can't do the Gen 80 for the next 4 years or 2 years? We should decide that, and then based on that we can figure out what the solutions might be.
So my extreme view was to give the IETF chair maximum flexibility. So I wanted to let them be able to decide whether this would be a part, like a fixed term or indefinite delegation of the role. The other thing I wanted to point out is at the moment, these emergency and workload-based delegations are in one document simply because I felt like dealing with the boilerplate only once. But the working group could decide to split this. And so if we have consensus that we want to deal with the stand-in one, with the emergency one, for example, right? I have no problem having 2 short documents, and one of them goes forward on a different timeline than the other one. That's a possibility as well.
So I apologize to Colin. I don't think we're going to have time to get to your contribution, because we have 3 minutes left, and my concern as chair is, where do we go from here? I'm not sure that from the discussion today, I feel like we've made progress on getting everybody lined up in the same direction of where we're going from here. I'm looking at my co-chair and wondering if he agrees.
Yeah, I think that's mostly true, but it's not, maybe not entirely true, because I think there's some agreement maybe potentially that we should split the 2 things from each other. So that would be a helpful exercise, and then we know at least that we want to do the emergency stand-in thing, and then we have to figure out what the solution is. And then for the other thing, the workload, maybe figuring out the list of problems that we want to address, and then agree on that before fixing the solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think my chief criterion is we don't want to be in Vienna sort of with the same, here's a new proposal and here's a slightly different proposal, and it doesn't address all these 6 different things that have already been discussed. I think the discussion today has been very useful. It keeps sort of shining light on some of the darker corners of the overall issue space. And I mean, I sort of wonder if we shouldn't spend some time for some value of we being very crisp about which part of the problem we're trying to solve and getting working group agreement on that. And Lars, I don't know, how do you feel about how the discussion is going?
I think the discussion, I mean, this is not a super urgent document, right? And so I can totally agree, see the working group spending time elsewhere, and that's fine, right? I don't need to finish this by Vienna or this year or ever, frankly. I mean, my motivation for this has slightly.
But the working group has a charter item that it has to address.
So, you know, when the working group wants to have a engaged discussion on this, I'm very happy to have it. But I can also see us prioritize other things first.
Maybe it would be useful. I mean, obviously we have prioritized other things, but you know, hopefully we are near the end on those things. Some things still to work on, obviously, as you've heard today. But
no, you jinxed
we're gonna get there at some point. But rather than just put this whole thing aside, is maybe come up with a step one. What is the step one in this delegation topic, rather than figuring out the full answer.
Let me make a proposal, and that is I'm going to split the document into an emergency one and into a workload-based one. For the emergency one, it seems like the only disagreement we really have is who's the default and how do they get chosen, right? And it's not a small issue, but I think that's the issue, the one issue we have there. And maybe we can put this to bed until Vienna. And the other one, we will see what happens. That'll take more discussion time, I think. I actually think there are 3 parts. I'm going to give a minute to 30 seconds to Colin since he keeps working up behind.
All right, so Colin and Miria, and then I'm going to declare that we need to do some offline discussion about where from here, and thank everybody for the thoughtful discussion that we've had. Colin?
Yeah, hi. So thank you for that. I actually think there are 3 parts to this. There's the incapacity part. There's the someone wishes to be IETF chair but realizes they cannot do the whole job at the points they are being appointed and needs to discuss with the NomCom. And there is someone has already been appointed IETF chair and then needs to reduce their workload for some reason. And that might be a health issue, that might be maternity leave, that might be something else. And I think if we separate those 3, it will be easier to make progress.
Okay, thanks. Miria?
I just quickly wanted to note that they might not be completely independent, because if the chair is able to delegate, then we can maybe pick it. And this also means the stand-in emergency chair is able to delegate, and that might mean we could pick a different person.
Yeah, I sort of think doing the general case first might actually make more sense in that regard. But all right, I think that it's going to take a little bit of thought about how to move forward with this. So thank you, Lars, for all the work here, and thank you everybody for the thoughtful discussion around all the issues. I think we at least have made progress in understanding where some of the critters with teeth are in this space. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
And with that, we are done. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Leslie and Yuri, for facilitating us through this.